We're rolling.
Let's do it.
You ready to do this?
I'm ready.
Welcome to the Rollercoaster.
Thanks, man.
It's everything you're expecting it to be.
Well, we'll find out.
Which is just an insane up and down, topsy-turvy roller coaster.
Got experience for that, so
Good.
I'll put my hands up while we do it.
I want to kick us off with a banger, which is, what do police officers, firefighters, and startup founders all have in common?
This is going to be so terrible. What, Tyler?
I don't know. You tell me. That's why you're here.
Oh, that was so smooth. Oh, this feels like a first date now all of a sudden. Me. Let's do it.
Rahul Sidhu, baby.
Yeah.
Rahul Sidhu. We're not going to mess up that last name.
Yeah.
So the audience is going to learn a little bit about you. I think we've known each other for a little bit, not a long time.
Mm-hmm.
Become friends. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. You're welcome for my friendship.
And, I think one thing that's really unique about you when I first talked to you was your history. I have some close family, my father-in-law, my brother-in-law, some other family that are lifelong police officers.
Mm-hmm.
And it tends to be the case that when you get into policing, you don't get out. So I think first thing I was blown away at.
You make it sound like a gang.
Well, it kind of is, right? I mean, it is a bit of a mafia once you get in, and I think there's things that we can talk about as to how you escaped.
Okay.
The police force, at least in a full-time capacity. So tell the audience about yourself. I'd love to hear a little bit about your start.
Sure.
Let's give the history on Rahul.
All right, you want the short form, the long form,
the medium
form?
Give me the medium form.
All right. So born and raised in LA, city of Los Angeles, not in like the nicest neighborhoods, kind of growing up in the beginning. My parents worked our way up. I essentially, growing up, I was really a tech kid, mostly focused on that. When I was like 14, I was working on building my own video game with a buddy of mine, that kind of guy, just kind of hacking around.
It's very Indian of you.
Yeah. That was the only direction I could go. It was either going to be medicine or tech. Anything else is like sub tier, right? So I focused on tech. However, my parents were like, no, it's going to be medicine. I had a little startup in high school that kind of helped pay my way through college. I thought that would be enough for my parents, but they were like, no, you got to study medicine. So I studied emergency medicine at the University of Pittsburgh. And I was working as an EMT and then a paramedic, kind of on the fire rescue side for a minute. I got to crew chief. I started going down the flight medic path. Like, I was really into it, but I was into being in the field. Like, I love the public safety aspect of it. I didn't care so much for like the hospital work, And so I told my parents, hey, your boy's not going to medical school. All right, we're going to try something different. That was the first half of that conversation. And the second half sucked a whole lot harder. It was, and I think I'm going to go back to LA and I think I'm going to become a cop. And they were real upset about that one. And I come from a public service background, from a family standpoint. Most of my family, like my mom's side especially, all in the military, both Indian and U.S. military, both, lost their lives in different sides of different countries fighting for, India and the United States. And so like that part was definitely part of our family, but my mom didn't want that for me. She wanted me to like get into just a stable medical career and go from there. So after working on the medic side, I became a cop in LA, and that was like in 2013, and I was there for a real short period of time. Like we're talking less than 2 years, full time. I'm still a reserve cop, so I'm still, I get to be like a part-time guy and keep my feet wet a little bit. But left and started SPIDR Tech, which is a tech startup that essentially was the world's first version of an automated customer service platform for public safety. And the quick pitch on that is the same way you'd buy something on the internet, like Amazon, et cetera, and you'd get that message, hey, here's your receipt, your item is shipped, your item is delivered, fill out this survey, let us know how we did. That whole automated system that gathers that feedback, we built that for anyone who calls 911 or crime victims, like these kinds of people that are interacting with public safety officials, and it's getting their feedback, and it's giving them like updates on their case and what to send to their insurance company, and someone was arrested and you got to come to court, like these kinds of things. So I spun that up with my co-founders, and went to Techstars New York in 2015, then raised a seed round with Winklevoss and Kayak Capital and a few other folks, then another round with Alphabet, Sidewalk Labs, and a few folks after that, and then ended up we're at like a little over 100 customers now, and sold it to another larger company in the public safety space last year. And that's the journey, man. That's how we got here.
I want to double click on one thing that you said
Yeah.
that I think is maybe an epidemic
Okay.
in a way, which is parent pressure. Okay, so this is
Sure.
something that, you talk to a lot of aspiring entrepreneurs, people that want to start companies.
Mm-hmm.
There's this mystique about it. But I think one of the main things that stops specifically young aspiring founders is pressure from their parents to do a thing, right?
Mm-hmm.
You should go to college. You should get a degree. You should do an MBA. You should study in a certain field, right?
Mm-hmm.
They get these pressures. So how did you not only just stare that in the face and say, no, I'm not going to do this traditional thing? And then how did your parents take it? And how did you navigate that to the point where they finally felt comfortable? Like, okay, we get it. We see it. We understand. Was it like the exit of the company, or was it well before that?
It was before that. I mean, like, my parents are certainly very supportive now. I'm not saying that they weren't supportive of the company, but I think any parent is going to look at a deviated path and go, okay, you could have gone to med school and had like a stable, large income for the rest of your life, which is like very little risk.
Yeah.
Or you can go out and bet your money and your time on like being that less than 1%, that can actually make a company and sell it.
Yep.
Right. And so they looked at it simply as this is a far riskier
It's a math
path.
problem. Yeah.
Add that to the public safety thing. Like, my parents didn't want me to be on, responding 911 calls as like a medic or a cop or any of that stuff. Like, anything that they felt like would put me in danger or might be seen as, not the greatest career. But I remember when I first got the Techstars investment, I was like, hey, I'm going to New York. I got like a check, like a 6-figure check to start this company. And they were like, okay. A little weird, but okay. Like, we'll support you, like, go do your thing. And then when I came back, I'm like, all right, I raised $1 million. And my mom saw The Social Network, that show, and the name that she recognized was like the Winklevoss twins, or not the show, the movie. And I was like, yeah, I raised $1 million, and the Winklevoss twins are my investors now. And she's like, okay, I'm listening.
She's warming up.
Yeah. And there was like this article that came out with Inc. magazine. It was like supported by Kairos 50. That said like top 50 global, or this year's top 50 like young global entrepreneurs trying to change the world. And I was one of them. And my mom's like, okay, I can brag about this to my old little aunties in the Indian space. Like, let's go. No, I'm good with this. And then from there, they were generally like supportive, and they've been supportive of that. They come from a business background, so I can't say that they weren't supportive of me trying business, but of course they wanted a more stable career, and they didn't want that business to be in public safety. And originally, like, I wanted to join the Marine Corps and like go down that path. And I always wanted to do something kind of in the field, downrange in some capacity. And they've been fighting me on that since the beginning. But at some point I just had to go, I'm going to do it. And recognized my parents were going to be really mad about it. And they were really mad for like almost a year. Like, they didn't want to talk about it. And there were certainly moments in my life where I knew this would make my parents mad, and I did it anyway. And then they came around to it. And now I think that they trust my judgment, pretty wholeheartedly. Like, they're not worried about me being a cop. They're not worried about me starting the next company or any of that stuff. I think they're like, okay, you figured it out. And it feels better. But there were moments where I had to be like, I'm just going to do it.
Totally. I think parents have their own insecurities for different reasons, right?
Sure.
So some of them are actually to do what parents are intended to do, which is to protect their kin, if you will. But some of it is their own insecurities. Maybe it's their friends, how their friends are going to perceive them as parents because their kids go down a certain path.
Totally.
And so, I think this is like actually an epidemic. I think this is something that a lot of aspiring founders really struggle with, is pressure from parents. You hear guys like Gary Vee and others like really drill in on this, but until you talk to somebody who's gone through it, I went through it a little bit, but not maybe to that sort of extent where you have that kind of pressure, but it's helpful.
There's definitely there's also add the Asian/Indian dynamic of like your education stopping at a bachelor's degree.
Yeah.
And it already feels weird because there's like multi-decade long structure of the more degrees you get, the better off you're going to be.
For sure.
And so when I stopped at a bachelor's degree and I'm like, yeah, I'm good. They were like, no, you're not.
No.
Go back and do more studying. It's like a very one-track way of doing it. But
Yeah.
I think now they wouldn't make the same decisions the way they did previously.
So you made this choice. You said, I'm just going to do it. Like, what had to build inside of you from a conviction standpoint to just be like, I mean, I guess I see this problem. I got to go solve it. Did you have this desire to make a large financial outcome? Was it the fact that you were burnt out being a police officer? You just wanted to build something? Like, how did you make the decision to actually start SPIDR? Tell us about that journey.
Yeah, it's a combination of things. You know, I think the largest driver for it was that I felt confident enough that I could make some level of an impact. And at the time, I'm like, I'm just going to take this one step at a time. If I just create a proof of concept that gets the gears rolling for somebody else, that's one thing. If I, once that moved, okay, if I can just get us to a point where we build this thing and we raise that first check and we give it a shot, like that's an accomplishment itself. And I kind of took it step by step until I'm like, nope, I see the fucking end game. And we're going to go 100% down that path.
Yeah.
I definitely wasn't burnt out on being a cop. I'm still a cop, still a reserve cop. So I still like enjoy parts of that job. And I have a lot of respect for all the full timers out there. I think also like being a cop or being in any, this is not just exclusive to being a cop. It's like any role where you're somebody who is like in that industry and you're a founder that goes out and does something by yourself. I saw it as an opportunity to have a much larger impact on like crime victims and 911 callers and cops than I would have if I just stayed in a car and just responded to like 7 calls a day.
Yeah.
And now like we have 10 million, like I think I was pulling the stats the other day. SPIDR Tech has helped over 10 million 911 callers across North America since its inception. We've gotten millions of pieces of feedback for every interaction between a police officer and community member. Like that's something that wouldn't have happened before. And I think I wanted that. I wanted to be able to say that. I wanted to be able to get to this point where I could say millions and millions and millions of people have had a better outcome for like their worst day potentially. And I assumed like when I thought about that, I'm like, if we can do that, the money will be there. Like the money will come. I'm a capitalist by nature. I'll plug those two things in. And we did, and it worked out.
Were you pretty, I think one of the other crutches that aspiring founders have is just finances, right? Like to start a company, it requires money, and typically you're not going to make any money, right?
Sure.
And I think a lot of founders want to moonlight their company into existence. Sometimes that doesn't work. So how did you do that? Did you moonlight the company while you were still a full-time police officer in the beginning? Did you just go cold turkey? Did you have money already from your family or savings or things like this? How did you bootstrap the company?
So there's definitely, like I wasn't moonlighting because I don't think I could have pulled it off if I was. There was a few months of, I would say more than a few months, like 9 months of just like me just burning through my savings to start. I borrowed $5,000 from my dad as well, like just to get the first piece spun up. And then I burned through my savings. Like I'm fortunate my dad was, willing to give that to me, and had that to give. But then after that, like once that first Techstars check came in, I just like basic expenses, like no, I wasn't paying for a salary for over a year. I just was like, I need to pay for rent. I need to pay for food. These are the things I'm going to pay for. And I just barely gave it enough to be able to skirt it through. Like my parents wouldn't have let me be homeless. They would have at least given me a home, and then I would have had to go get a job, right? Yeah. If I landed. Some people don't even have that. So I had the privilege of having that. But kept it going until finally when we raised that $1 million round, I paid myself a $60,000 a year salary, which is about as much as like the expenses were in New York and LA at the time. And then it went from 60 to like 75 and then 90. When we were acquired, I was making 120. Like it wasn't a lot of money. I mean, it's a lot of money like in the grand scheme of things, but not for a company that's making millions of dollars in revenue. I still wasn't taking like these 300, 400K salaries. And I just kept putting it off until I was like, one day there's going to be the liquidity event, and it hit. And we had the liquidity event and it worked out. Now, by the way, I'm not saying this is the way to go. Let me be clear. Like,
Yeah.
that's a riskier process. Number one, I had the privilege of getting that 5K and knowing I could go home and sleep on my parents' couch if I needed to. So it's not a one size fits all mentality, but it worked for me. That was the risk I took, for sure.
Amazing. I think before we get into more about the company and the roller coaster that you went through in building the company, because I've heard a little bit about it, but I want to go deeper.
Yep.
You talked about being a reserve cop,
Uh-huh.
something you're still doing. Did you do this all throughout, like since you left full-time cophood?
No. There was a period of time where I was just like focused purely on the business. And then a few years ago, so I think several years ago, I like talked to the new chief of police, and it was like really progressive, good, solid leadership kind of guy. And, I was like, hey, is it possible for me to come back as reserve? Like, I kind of miss it. And he's like, yeah. And then I went through the same application process again. I went through like field training again. Like
Really?
I had to re-earn all the stripes that I'd, even close to come close to earning in the past. It wasn't like, here's your gun badge and welcome back to cophood. Like I had to go through like a mini 2-week or 3-week refresher academy. It's like that was the only vacation I took actually when I was, for that 6-year period of time that it was pre-acquisition. I took 3 weeks off essentially to go to the Orange County Sheriff's Academy and get my ass kicked.
Wow.
And then
which one was it? North
Orange County Sheriff's.
Orange County?
Yeah, in California.
Okay.
And
is this part of LAPD in any way, or is it separate?
No. So it's there are a couple academies, the sheriff's academies that will put out, make police officers for the non-major cities.
Yeah.
And so they were just the closest one. Like they were hosting it for that 3-week period of time. So I'm like, my co-founder did it too. He was also a cop. Like he and I knew each other from the academy, like one of my two co-founders. And he and I both took those 3 weeks off for vacation, both went to the academy back together.
What?
He ended up going to a totally different department and had a hell of a time doing that. And then I went back to my old agency.
Crazy. Okay. So can anybody do that, or do you have to have gone through basic training? Like, did you have to be a cop previously to be a reserve cop, or can you just apply and go do it?
Technically, there's two paths. Like if you're a former full-time cop, all you need to do is a quick refresher, and then you have like all of the powers of a regular full-time officer when you're on duty, and even in some cases off duty, depending on the city that you're with. If you're not, then you have to go there is a path to being just a non-cop, and then doing like a couple of years of like part-time reserve academy training. You get all of the same training as you would as a full-time cop, but it just takes a lot longer to get it because you're doing it like a weekend a month and then 2 weeknights a week. And then you're finally minted after like 2 years of doing it. In fact, I had an engineer who I think it was like in 2016 or 2017, I think, came to us and was like, applied for a software engineering job for us. And his name's Mike. Shout out to Mike. He was like, hey, yeah, I've always wanted to be a cop, but obviously software engineering pays the bills, so I'm just gonna keep doing this. And I was like, what if we can do both? Like, what if we can help you become a cop? And he's like, that would be dope. And so
Really,
we hired him as a software engineer.
Really?
And he went to one of our customers, and they're like, yeah, come on in as a reserve cop. And he did his 2 years of reserve academy training, and he's a full-on like level 1 reserve cop now for that agency. He's been doing it for like a few years now, and now he's got the best of both worlds. So it's
Insane.
possible.
That's really interesting.
Yeah.
I think I've always had this desire, and for some reason I still haven't done it, having family in as police officers, to do these ride-along
Sure.
events. Maybe if somebody's thinking about becoming a reserve cop or a police officer, period, would you encourage them to go do a ride-along,
Totally.
one or two, just to see what it's like? And do you actually think you can get a good sort of feel for what it's like being a cop just by doing one or two of those?
Definitely not like a good feel, but it's a step in the right direction, because like really doing the job is very different than what you'll experience in a ride along. Like it's like a step there.
Yeah.
But understand that in a ride along, it's like that one isolated day. And every day as a patrol officer, for example, is like a totally different day.
Yeah.
Yeah. Some of you're still dealing with like petty theft and like the same kinds of calls, but it's a very different experience. And then understand that you're being protected on a ride along. So you're not going to go to all the things. You're not they'll drive to like that hot call and be like, stay in the car, and then they'll run and then do all the police work and then come back. So it's not always that you're going to experience some of the hardest stuff, depending on who you do it with. And then the other part of it is like, a lot of being a cop is not something you can experience until you're a cop. Like until you're the person that has to make that split second decision, or you're the person that has to like talk the person down, or you have to deal with the politics in the back end. All like the hardest part of the job, you're just not going to experience in ride along. What you experience is like the wee woo, like fun, like go lights and sirens to places and pulling people over and just kind of watching for the window. But you're not going to experience the hard parts, you know, and like the parts that keep people up at night.
For sure. Amazing. So last question on this, and then we'll move on to more company related stuff. But you mentioned that you started being a reserve cop again a couple of years ago. If my timeline serves me correctly, that was maybe right around COVID kicking off, maybe right before.
Yeah.
So, like, did you have any experiences, you know, with all the looting and the chaos and the craze that, how does this work? Like, do you get called out to go and do something? Do they put it on a job board and you get to go select? Like, anything crazy happen during COVID?
Yeah, I mean, every department's different. I work for a great department, really takes care of its folks. Like by the time COVID, I was back to, like, I'd gone through all my retraining and stuff like that by the time COVID hit. And it was actually very eerie. So just before even like the George Floyd, like the protests and the riots that we had in LA, just COVID by itself was weird because like when the lockdowns first started, we would drive around in police cars and be like the only people. And it felt like a ghost town on like at 2 p.m. on a Tuesday. And you'd just like be driving around and you'd see somebody and like, and we were actually genuinely, like right when it started, like everybody was scared. Like the cops were a little worried too. Like, is this it? Is this like we were trying to, keep distance, and like it was very policing when you had to keep that level of distance and almost create like this impersonal, like, hey, you stay there. What can I do for you? Like, we had to double mask up and double glove up just to like take down a bad guy. And like you added this layer of like what's going to happen. That was already weird. Obviously it started to, like 4 weeks in, people started getting a little bit more comfortable, just like everyone else did. And then there was a totally different aspect of COVID policing that was weird, where we had to enforce some level of like, lockdowns. You can't be here, wear your mask kind of thing. But we had no authority to really do it. Like, so it was like the way that the government had kind of set it up was go do this. But like, if they say no, you can't really take them to jail. Like, but like definitely make yourself the enforcer. So we get in these weird situations where you don't want to be as a cop, or like, you're like, hey, you have to do this thing. The person's like, I'm not gonna do that. And you're like, okay, please. And like, you don't want to be in that position as a cop because you have to have the ability to like go, oh, you're not going to, then we'll have to escalate this. Or, okay, you're not going to, then like you have to have the decision-making capability. We didn't. Yeah. But then when, the protest started, there was definitely like a difference, especially in LA, between like the protests and the riots. It was like a very different, two different things. Protests, didn't really pop off. Like, people were out there protesting,
relatively peaceful.
Their First Amendment right, doing what they had to do for good reason. And then the riots were just like opportunists going out there, burning everything down and stealing a bunch of stuff. It felt very disconnected from the protests. And the first couple nights we sent a team out to like help with escorting firefighters around so that they could put out the fires without getting their asses kicked. Because like at the riots, they were targeting firefighters and not letting them put out fires. They would just try and beat them up and do all kinds of stuff to not let them put out fires. So they had to have cops that would like escort the firefighters to prevent that from happening. And then as that died down in LA, like we had to like just go on anti-looting, like just be anti-looters. So like every city had its hotspots and we'd move around. And if like Twitter or WhatsApp or Telegram was popping off, like here's where we're gonna hit next. And you'd have these flash mobs of like somewhere between 20 to 100 people just boom, show up at that location and just bam, ram into it and start going at it. And the only way you could prevent that from happening is like just get there so that it scares off like the first few cars and everyone disperses and no one tries to hit it. And we would still jam up cars that would like, pull up a little bit slow, and we would like, pull out, and it was like a nervous time because like cops were you'd hear gunshots. Like there were no rules for a minute. You know what I mean? Yeah. And so we'd pull up to a car, that was like at the Target parking lot 11:30 with their lights off. Okay, this is the first guy here, and we'd pull them up and they'd be like, why are you pulling us over? And then I'd look in the back seat and there's like 46 iPads just like in like boxed up and they're just like sitting there. And I'm like, hey, you like, what are you doing? And they're like, we're just chilling. And like, we're not even taking the iPads away. Cause like, we have to get to the next thing. And so we're just like, just go somewhere else. Like we're distributing the crime and looting like in other places. It was a crazy time, man. And I remember like during this time, I was like fighting to fundraise. We had just gone through like a failed acquisition a couple months before, where the acquiring party with COVID, like 2 days before we were supposed to finish it, said, hey, actually COVID's making us nervous. We're going to split this valuation in half so you can take it or leave it. And I'm like, see you later time. Yep. You know, like we're not doing that. And then I had to take all this emergency, like I had to start raising emergency funding basically to keep everything going. And so I was fundraising. I remember there were moments where I was in uniform, like at either a protest or like on the way to like when I'm dealing with the looting team and I'm just like on a call with my AirPods and I'm like pitching investors and like turning the radio down and asking my partner, let me know if we get popped, like we'll go. And I'm just standing outside the police car and I'm just like, yeah, so here's what's going on and here are the metrics and it's just chaos. You know what I mean? And then I had to like get back in the car and like, you know, like it happened. I'm like, hey, I gotta call you back. And I had to like go deal with it, but I didn't want them to know that's what's happening, you know? Because I'm like, this founder's all over the place. And it was a weird time. And this is honestly one of like from a roller coaster standpoint, one of the lowest moments. Cause I thought, okay, this company, like we might not make it through this financially. My identity was all over the place because I was, you know, we could talk about this next, but I'm like, you know, yeah, I'm a cop, but I've experienced my own, like I've dealt with racism my whole life. Yep. And so it felt like this weird dichotomy that people weren't allowing to mix. Like, no, you're not a victim of anything. You're a cop. So like you don't get to have an opinion here. And there was all kinds of misinformation just being spread. And I had people that I thought were friends were like, hey, we can't be friends anymore. Like, you know, you've decided to put on a badge. And now that I've learned more about it, like, you're out. And that was like really painful. You know, I was going through like a breakup at the time. And like, so it kind of felt like I didn't have another support system. And I remember there was a moment where I was just beat. I was just totally beat early June. And I was just laying there on the floor of my apartment. And I'm like, dude, I'm experiencing like, I'm anxious. Like everything that I've ever felt, like I'm losing control of everything. Yeah. And that was like the first moment I'm like, I need to see a therapist, you know? And I've dealt with that before with like, you know, as a paramedic, we had to go through critical incident stress management. And like you'd occasionally see somebody, it was mandatory and it was helpful. But that was like when I reached out, I'm like, someone help me. Like I'm losing it. And those couple months were hard. And I tried to focus on just building the company. We were able to raise the funding completely internally through our current investors. And then I solved that part. And then it started to feel like people weren't like, not everybody hated me, you know, like, which was really hard to deal with. And I just focused on like going on social media and sharing my story and like trying to clear up misconception and just be like a rational person. And then I started doing podcast interviews left and right, you know, to just tell people about like, hey, here's the answer to this and that. And got my way out of it.
Was that part of your therapy? Like, did your therapist encourage you to like get out there publicly? And
she said you're in kind of a unique position to be able to speak on this, you know, to be able to speak on what it's felt like to deal with racism. And I've dealt with being racially profiled by cops and like dealing with bad cops. I've dealt with that before I was a cop. And you get to explain the cop side and you get to, you know, like you're in this position where you've worked with over, you know, hundreds of different agencies. Yep. So go out there and see if that makes you feel better. And it totally did. Amazing. It was helpful.
For those who want to hear that side, go to the Pump podcast. It's amazing. He talks about this in depth. We're not going to talk about it today on the podcast, but I think we'll link it in this one. Please go listen to that if you have time.
Yep. Papiano, my man.
So I want to talk about, I definitely do want to get back into this therapy thing and double click on that at some point here shortly.
Yeah.
But, you know, one thing I'm really interested in is I think there's this misconception with founders who are starting companies that the only thing they can eat, sleep, breathe, live, pick a word that, you know, correlates to life is their company. Mm-hmm. You know, you proved that, no, you can be a part-time cop. You can do both, right? You can have a life outside of just being a startup founder.
Yeah.
So how did you find that balance? Obviously, you shared an example that wasn't easy, right? You're taking investor calls while you're outside of a car and there's looting happening right in front of you. But like, how did you maintain that balance? And I think the other thing is, how did you convince your investors and your board and the public that it was okay for you to not just be eat, sleep, breathe SPIDR Tech?
Yeah, look, so I would say there's definitely there's nuance to this because number one, I never felt like any of my investors thought, and this would be crazy, but never felt that any of my investors thought not having some level of a healthy work-life balance was like a good idea. You know, like you need to have a healthy work-life balance. So I never felt like I had to explain taking some time off here and there.
Yep.
But for all the hobbies I could have had, you know, saying, hey, I'm going to go out there and just put boots on the ground with my customers. That's my hobby. Never like made them feel like it was a waste of time.
Yeah.
Especially in my industry, being able to stay in the mix is very helpful. People want to, you know, especially the cops, like they trust cops, right? So being able to maintain that and it just, I mean, for me, it was like, it's therapy for me too. Like I get to put the uniform on and go out and do that. And I still feel like I get to help and, you know, be part of that solution there. But my investors always understood that, but that's kind of a unique situation. For other founders out there, you are no good to your company or your shareholders or your customers if you're completely burned out. You're useless. You're a fucking paperweight. You need to do what fulfills you outside of your job. I'm not saying that if you get that itch, here's the other thing. If you get that itch like at 10 p.m. to go do it, like work, do it. That's your body. Like the itch is your body going, this will actually make me feel better. Like I'll be more anxious if I don't do that thing. So I'm not trying to say turn down the workaholic part of it, but don't burn it past a reasonable limit because you feel like you have to. Any investors who are like, no, you need to be working 100 hours a week. They've never operated before, right? Like that's just how it goes. Yeah. Your results will show. Investors and shareholders will only ask questions if you're failing and you're not putting the time in. But I would never invest in a CEO personally, and I've been writing checks now. I wouldn't invest in a CEO that I didn't feel like was able to make that decision themselves and balance their work and life so that they didn't burn out. It's a marathon. It's not a sprint. You have to be good at treating it that way. Some of the best founders over time, they manage that. Life might be family, you know, life might be like you've got health problems. It might not be something that you get to decide, yeah, fuck it. I'll pick that up in 3 years.
Amazing.
You know what I mean?
Yeah. Well said.
So you got to do it that way for sure.
I love it. Very well said. One thing that I work with CEOs on is, you know, in addition to having a normal life and hobbies and these sort of priorities, prioritizing things that are actually important for human performance, like having good relationships, having good physical, I mean, most jacked Indian I've ever seen, physical and mental health, right? having good,
most jacked Indian I've ever seen, this dude says,
you know, having a good mindset. I think focusing on those things and being, fulfilled from a human performance standpoint is also super important. But I think a lot of founders forget that, right? They forget to exercise, they forget to eat well, they forget to sleep long enough, right? And these sort of things. So
if Elon Musk can sleep 6+ hours a night,
anybody can.
You can sleep 6+ hours a night, right? Totally. Like that's a time management thing.
Yeah.
So
I agree. So let's get maybe back into the company. So, you basically bootstrapped this thing for the first 9 or so months, if I recall you saying.
Mm-hmm.
And then you got accepted into Techstars New York, which is not easy. And then you raised venture capital from some really iconic investors, right? Mm-hmm. You mentioned Alphabet, Winklevoss, Twin, a couple of others. Tell me about your experience raising capital. What was required? How did you get to a place where somebody was willing to stroke you a check? Was it because you're Rahul and you're amazing? Did you have an amazing company? Was it the idea? Like, tell founders who are looking to raise capital about what was required to do that.
0 to 1, unless you have a background, you've got already a great network, you know, you've come from money. 0 to 1 is a chicken and egg game. And there's no way around it except faking it until you make it. You have to create something from nothing. You have to play this game where you need money to satisfy customers. You need customers to satisfy investors. And so in the beginning, we had this one major agency. Like I just pitched UX screenshots with a clickable prototype that I built myself, just learning it and built myself. And, I learned how to code a little bit. I went to like one of those coding boot camps and just understood the necessary skills. And I just built a really shitty prototype. And I went to a couple agencies and I finally went to one. I'm like, if I build this, will you use it? And they were like, yeah, okay. And I was like, for free. Will you use it for free? Like, is it good enough for you to use it for free? And they said, sure. I said, great. Can I send you a non-binding LOI that just says we're friends, basically? And they're like, yeah, fucking whatever. And so I sent that to them and they signed it. And then I went like to investors. So I'm like, first customer. And, there's our first investor, he's amazing. His name's Alex Iskold. He was the managing director of Techstars at the time. He's now managing director with, or partner with 2048 Ventures out in New York. Yep. And he's big on something that I'm now very big on, which is founder market fit. And for him, he makes a decision on like, okay, let me understand this vertical. Okay, policing, like that's a unsexy vertical that does not have a lot of innovation. So ripe for that type of disruption. Here's a founder who understands that world and also understands the tech, like a unique bridge between those two things. This isn't happening very much. That's pretty much the bet I need to make. Like, can we go from, this is really early pre-seed where he's very good. Yep. It's like, can we go from here? We hadn't written like really any code. He saw through my bullshit. Like he's a very sophisticated investor. So I oversold and he's like, okay, chill the fuck out, kid. Like,
stop.
But he's like, look, it's founder market fit. They're in the right direction. And, I try, at least hopefully showed enough tenacity to where he was like, all right, let's give this kid a shot. And, like I said, it was a little chicken and egg. Then I got the money. I had to go back to the customers and be like, all right, we're working on something here. And then showing them progress. Like, okay. And then we finally, I'm going to be honest, we burned through half of that $1 million in capital building a product that was too early for its time. And I was like, we're going to run out of money in a few months. And I can't go back to everybody to ask for more money because I've made no real progress aside from building the wrong thing. And I basically called up another chief. I was just talking to him today, former chief of police in Burlington, Vermont. And I was like, hey, I need your help. Like, we're going to run out of money. He's like, why don't you come out to Burlington and let's hang out. And we went on his boat. Like he had a nice boat and we just like went around the lake and talked about it. And he was like, he really focused us on two things. He's like, one, like, let's go simple. Like let's think about the problems that aren't being solved right now. One of the biggest problems by your customers, your chief executives, chiefs of police, is that their performance metric for whether or not they'll be fired has changed fundamentally. It used to be our crime rates going up and down and they can track that. But now it's what does public perception say about the job I'm doing? And that is not trackable today. So focus on finding a way to like take this performance metric and improve it and track it for them. The second thing is that he's like, what we talked about in this boat ride was the modern consumer their expectations has increased tenfold. You, like I said, you buy something online, you call an Uber, like, what's happening. Yep. That's not happening in policing. And we can't match those expectations when they're watching CSI Miami and some dude's coming out of a Black Hawk helicopter and dusting off a Toyota Corolla for fingerprints and going, I've solved the crime. So you got to find a way to match that. And so we're like, okay. I was like, why don't we just send a message to crime victims automatically based on the report getting filed? Your report's filed. Here's what you need to know. He's like, that would go a long way. So I went back to Manhattan Beach where our office was. I went straight into the office. Like I flew straight same day and erased the blackboard and said, we're not building this anymore. We're building this. And I went to the engineers and said, can you build this in 11 days? And they built it nonstop for 11 days. And they said, well, we have someone to deploy it to. And I said, I'll figure that part out next. And then my co-founder, Elon, and I, we went out to this agency, this chief that was really supportive of us just because he kind of liked us. And he was like, come on down and show me what you've got. So we drove up to the Santa Barbara area, to a small town, Grover Beach. And I said, here's what we're working on. What do you think? And I was expecting like, this is gonna be a process. He's like, okay, let's do it. Yeah, let's go. Like, I believe in you guys. And that was it. That was our first customer we could deploy to. And we deployed to him like 2 weeks later. And right before we ran out of money, and then I called all the investors and said, this works. Like, I remember sending the first message automatically and then the second one automatically. And then now we're just automatically sending messages to crime victims for the first time ever. Never happened before in like the history of policing. And the chief was like, this is great, guys. Like, this is working. And then we deployed it to a major city that we had a relationship with. The first one that wrote that friendship LOI. And then we're testing it at scale. Like, we're talking about like thousands of crime victims. You know what I mean? Like, it's a major city. And we're punting it out. And I called investors and said, we've pivoted. And like, what are you talking about? I'm like, we're doing this instead. And they're like, okay. And then I'm like, and we've got 2 customers and it's live. And they're like, oh, okay. So this is the right direction. And then from there, had to get 2 more paying customers. I called my old department and I'm like, hey, chief, you want to come check this out? Also, like, can I get some money? And they were our first paying customer, and then called his friend, and we had a second paying customer, and then raised around from there.
Amazing. Sounds like you got to a point where you were close to running out of money. You made it through that one. Did you have any other moments in the history of SPIDR Tech where you almost ran out of money again?
Yeah. Actually, the moment that I'm talking about, like, when we had 2 paying customers, we were still running out of money. So I needed to raise like $2.5 million.
Yeah.
And it wasn't working out. Like, I had a couple investors, like some great investors that were like, yeah, we'll put some money in, but I couldn't get it closed. Like, I couldn't get that big check that was going to push the momentum. You know what I mean? And it started getting to a point, I'm like, okay, I've got about 3 weeks left until I have to, like, I'm only going to have enough money to wind this down, basically. Like, there's a wind down amount, like a reserve amount.
Wow.
And I remember Alphabet, Sidewalk Labs was like kind of the last shot, you know, like I'd burned through a whole Excel sheet of 100 plus. And I'm like, man, and I was just feeling, I remember waking up that morning and to an email that they sent me that said, hey, if you got some time this week, let's jump on a call. We have feedback for you. That's what they said. And I'm like, feedback does not sound good. No one's just like, I've got like, you don't go on a date. And then she's like, "You want to go on a second date?" I'm like, "Yeah, you know, I got some feedback." You're not like, "Yeah, it's not gonna happen." You know what I mean? So I was like, it just, my heart sank, and I'm like, "That's it. That's the end of the company probably." And I just remember I was like, I don't give a shit. I just emailed them like, "Hey guys, can we rip the Band-Aid off right now? Like, can you guys hop on a call today?" And they're like, "Yeah, give us an hour." And they called me and they're like, "Yeah, so you know, how much you want? Like $750K? Like we'll write you your check." And I'm like, "What?" And then my first thought, I was like angry. I was like, "Do you guys understand what feedback means?" Like, I was like, and they're like, "Oh no, so sorry." Like, "Yeah, we didn't even think about that." Yeah, but we're in. And that was like, I went from my lowest low to my highest high, because now I'm like, oh, we're Alphabet backed. You know what I mean? Like, I'm an Alphabet backed CEO. Like, we could figure this out now. You know what I mean? And I called my co-founder. Actually, I called our head of like sales at the time, Mandy Duffy, and I was like, "Mandy," and she was at a conference with my co-founder. They were like, they were getting ready like to tear the place down. They're both in their own hotel rooms. And I called Mandy. I'm like, "Mandy, we got it. We got the check from Alphabet." And she was screaming. She was so excited. She ran out of her hotel room and she's like, "Stay on the phone," and like banged on Elon's door and was like, "Open the door." And Elon opened. I was like, "What the hell's wrong with you?" And she was just like, "We got money. We're like, we're alive. Like, we don't have to find jobs."
Amazing.
And he was so stoked. And then that was like a huge high for me. So like that lowest low was so close to my highest high. That was the roller coaster for sure.
Oh, phenomenal. That's so good. There's, I don't think, there's this unique cohort of founders that have started a company, regardless of like, if they started the company and they folded it 2 weeks later, or they built it for 20 years and had, you know, a $100 billion exit, right? There's like this gambit of founders that exist in there. Nobody, like none of them that I've ever talked to have not almost ran out of money at least once, and most of them like several times.
Totally.
Like in our company, like 4 real times where we were 1 payroll away, otherwise we were done. I'm looking at like, what am I going to do next? Do I need to go get a job? Right. Yeah. The whole thing. So that's
rare
amazing.
to not, and like, it's rare to not have that happen.
Yeah.
And I'm fortunate it did, because the lessons you learn.
Yeah.
You know, like almost skirting the bottom a couple times, like it makes it easier to not do that again.
Oh yeah.
You know, like the second time around, I'm not even like we're talking about, you know, spinning up the next thing, and it's not like we're gonna get our first million ARR before we write a line of code. You know, like it's a whole different process now.
Yeah, totally.
But yeah.
I want to talk about that.
Okay.
I want to talk about what you learned from your first one that you're going to deploy into the second one.
Okay.
Before we do that, I want to double click on one thing, which was,
If you say double click one more time.
I want to double penetrate down deep.
Okay, Jesus.
Into one.
I'm so upset that I gave you shit for
Into
double
one
click. Let's go
more
back to the first one.
You talked about this sprint that you did
Mhm.
with your engineers. You said, hey, we have 11 days. We got to build this thing. Go build it. They did it 24 hours a day, nonstop.
Yeah.
You know, I think I have two sort of thoughts coming out of that. One is like maybe talk about these seasons that you go through as a founder or as a company where you have to sprint.
Mm-hmm.
And then how do you sort of cool off and back off a little bit
totally,
intentionally to make sure that people have time to recharge?
Yeah.
And then the second thing is, how do you motivate that team to do this for 11 days, 24 hours a day?
Yeah. Look, first of all, shout out to the engineer, like our engineers at that time, Ken and I, Cerny, Jefferson Choi, Anton Halim, David Perel. I think those are the four engineers we had at that time. Mike, I think Cove was coming up. And I think that when you're motivating a team to just go through hell, you have to be, as like a leader, you have to be very clear about what the difficulty is about to be and what the promised land is supposed to be. And they need to trust you. Like they need to know you can't have failed them before. Like, you know what I mean? They need to know that he's giving us the information that we need to be able to make our own personal decision. Am I going to jump into this hellstorm or am I going to not do it? You don't get a second chance at this with your folks. Like if you're going to lead him into battle, like you don't get to fail it first, right? So I was transparent, and in some cases, like maybe too transparent. Like, you know, there's definitely a balance, but I was transparent. Hey guys, like we need to do this or we're gonna fail. Like and here's why we would fail. Not just like some blanket statement, right? Like we're gonna run out of money, and here's what we need to do. And it hurt because as a leader, it feels like you're failing them right now in that moment. Like I'm sorry, I got us here. You know what I mean? But there's no other way to show them. Like you have to take your licks and be like, are we in this together? Can we get out of this? That's number one. Number two is you have to show them, here's how I'm going to do my part. If they're going to sit there and code for like 11 days straight and like burn their weekends, and Jefferson, I remember, slept at the office, like would wake up the next morning and brush his teeth. God, shout out to you, man, Jefferson. But if I'm going to like, you know, expect them to do that, I better be there with them as much as I can. But if I'm not there with them, I better be like doing something to move my side, which was get a department on board, plan out the rest of this, start getting the fundraising moving, like do my part of that hell. And they need to see that I'm doing that, you know, like that's the only way the morale stays. If I'm just going to sleep and coming back like, hey guys, what'd you get done last night? And I'm not doing my part, they will know. If you have good, talented, smart people, they will know and you will fail. So you got to sweat with them, bleed with them. And they need to know that you're not going to be okay if this fails. You know, the first time around, we would have all had to go get jobs. Second time around, it's going to feel a little different because, you know, we've had an exit, we've made our money. It's not going to feel as crazy. So I have to find another way to show them I'm willing to bleed. You know what I mean? It's not just my blood and sweat. It's going to have to be like, I'm putting my money in. You know, I'm ready to lose what I've earned before. I'm ready to go.
So good.
So you have to show them that. And then once you've gotten through it, like that was a big moment for us when it worked. Their 11 days of hell like paid off. They're ready to go to battle again. And they've been to battle again more than once.
Really good. Amazing. So you talked about, you know, I don't know how deep you want to get into this, but you raise some money, you go on this roller coaster, you catch product market fit, company grows rapidly for a number of years. You have an exit. You sell the company.
We were 300% year over year for those 3 years, man. We were
I mean, you were cranking, right? You sell the company, and what happens?
Yeah. So look, it becomes a different mission. You are no longer executing your vision. It has to change. You're executing someone else's vision. And when you sell your company, you hope that like that other vision is going to align with yours. And not, it did with us. But, it's not this, it's not like every founder that sells, like, understand you have to be okay with it. It's not going to be the same. Like, even if you're the president of that particular business unit, you're not calling the shots.
Yeah.
You're playing by a different set of rules. It's going to be a different culture potentially than you're used to. And your job might change to, like, building the business. It might change from doing that to taking care of your people, making sure that they're taken care of, or like whatever it is that you have to fit the gap. It might totally change. You have to be okay with that. Not every acquisition is the same. Some acquisitions are like straight cash and like there's no retention piece and you're just giving up your baby and you're walking away from the firehouse, right? And some acquisitions are like cash and then you stay around for 6 months, 12 months, like 20% is going to be an earnout, which means basically, they're going to hold some of that cash until you hit certain milestones or you stay around for long enough. That can be structured a little differently. Ours was very much like a cash up front and then like a performance-based earnout where we had to hit certain numbers to get extra money, on top of that. So there was like there's definitely a weird dynamic when that happens because now you feel like you want to be in control of your destiny. And if the acquiring company, like if you're become misaligned, you now feel like your destiny is no longer in your control, which is a very difficult feeling for a founder or CEO to previously had complete control, even up in the ups and downs. You could at least control how you were going to manage what if like that down and manage that up. That's a hard thing. And then the other hard thing is, and I'm not speaking to my experience specifically. I'm just giving,
in general.
Sure. The other hard thing is like you have spent, 7 or 8 years in battle with your people and you want to make sure they're taken care of in every way. Like you don't want them to feel like you led them to an acquisition that is now worse for them. Like they don't like being there or something like that. I'm not saying that happened with us in any capacity, but I've seen that as well. And that's a very difficult feeling. You want to make sure that they're taken care of. So, we've found a good home for our company. I think, we're all aligned. Like, I think as SPIDR Tech continues to grow, in my last day is in a couple days at SPIDR, but as it continues to grow, I think finding a company that has every incentive to grow it is important and has a reputation for taking care of their customers, which our acquirer definitely does, is important. And then the rest you have to be okay with is out of your hands. Maybe it might not grow as fast as you wanted it to. Maybe it'll grow even faster. All I can say is all I care about is that we will have fundamentally shifted policing. Like they will get into the hands of every department they possibly can over the next 5 to 10 years. Amazing. And it will become like the homeostasis in policing that every now and then caller gets a text and it's normal for, every time you interact with a cop, you'll get a survey and like those, like the victims are taken care of. That is definitely what I hope for. And I think that if they can get it to that scale, that's important. And I really just, all you can hope for is they take care of your people too. And I've got no reason to believe that they won't.
Amazing. Thanks for sharing. Let's end on this. You talked about a little bit of, maybe teasing it. What's next? You gonna build another company?
Yeah, man. I'm in my early 30s, and I'm maybe is 33 middle? Are you in your mid 30s at 33?
You're in the middle of the young 30s and mid 30s.
It's the transition year, right?
Yeah.
Okay, because it feels like 30, 31, 32. That's 3 years that are early.
Very lame age.
Adding your 4th year in your 30s starts feeling like it's a stretch if I say early.
Yeah.
All right. Anyway, early.
You're
Fuck
young.
That. Yeah.
You're young.
Anyway, early 30s. Like I thought to myself, there's other industries that interest me. Like I'm a big space nerd. I'm an aviation nerd. I'm a pilot. That's a hobby of mine. I love doing that. Big into like consumer applications of AI. And also I have a big thesis on how much opportunity there is for industry automation over the next 10, 20, 30 years. So there's all these things that I think, are very interesting that have nothing to do with what I've done in the past. But I've decided to maintain the discipline in the thing that I know best and is closest to my heart, which is public safety. It's a vertical that is continuously ripe for disruption, has seen over a 3x, year over year, new companies, new products, and is like, is open now to adopting totally like culturally, public safety is going, hey, let's work with startups. Let's find these niche solutions.
Nice.
And the leaders in these organizations over the last 5 years or so have like been folks that are willing to come in and like be okay if something breaks as long as they're making progress in some fashion. That's totally new for that industry. So as a founder who has been able to previously bridge the gap, you know, with as an industry person and on the tech side, it would feel deeply irresponsible for me to bail now in that industry and go do something else. So I'm going to keep going with public safety. It's, you know, I'm working on we're talking about maybe spinning up a venture fund with a bunch of industry partners. There isn't like, you know, someone who's constantly tackling and working with early stage startups to help them get that product market fit, that first dozen customers and build that up. I know I was talking to our mutual friend about that. David Paul, shout out. And you know, I've got a couple other bets in public safety that if I can work with companies or spin something up, you know, I'm happy to do that. Like, I'll just tell you right now, I believe 2 fundamental bets. One, police helicopters, you know, they're non-transporting. That's going to change. Ultimately, those will be replaced by drones. There's no reason to spend the money, put people in a helicopter that will crash. We're seeing deaths constantly when a drone can physically do that job for way cheaper, way greener, you know, like it just, there's some tech limitations I think are going to be cleared up in the next couple of years. And there's FAA regulations, which it's, you know, the government, we got to hope for the best. That's one bet. The other bet is I think that we're going to move from a purely response-based, you know, which is like a knee-jerk reaction we're dealing with right now, kind of process with policing to more of a project management process. There's no place right now for you if you call a police department and say someone keeps running the stop sign by my house, or I have like an ex-boyfriend who stalks me. He's not here right now, but can you pay attention? Or I need extra patrol presence. I want to see more marked police cars in my neighborhood. My shop keeps getting robbed. There's no like mechanism for that to turn into a project that can be tracked. It's just, do I respond to this now or not? Thank you for letting us know. And then I've seen like departments that try to do this literally as of this year. They'll pull out a piece of paper and they'll write this, like the intersection or the place, and hand it to a cop and say, hey, can you write a couple tickets and just write? I mean, we're talking pen and paper still, 2022. So I think building the infrastructure technically to be able to generate project management in the space of policing and track that stuff automatically. How much like police presence, marked police cars, how many hours spent were in this neighborhood, and how did that actually affect calls and crime, and how many times did we, you know, write a citation for running that stop sign in the school zone that we've gotten 14 complaints over, and then being able to take that data and give it back to those people, I think is an interesting opportunity. I think that's also an inevitability. Otherwise, you're just not going to make those people happy ever, and that's not acceptable.
Amazing.
Right? So,
now with all that, one thing I was hoping you would share there is, was there 1 or 2 kind of key learnings from your first one that are going to greatly benefit you if you decide to do another company?
I mean, I would separate like key advantages. Some of it's learnings, and some of it is like, you know, you built a network, you built a reputation, you've got some know-how there, but on the learning side, yeah, definitely. One, people are generally afraid of government sales. Investors have now opened up, like top tier firms are investing in public safety companies now, which wasn't the case 8 years ago when I started to race. Like, it was just ugly. Everyone's like, oh, government sales cycles, because they didn't know the difference between like a federal sale and a like local, sale. Our numbers were great. Like, we were making these sales happen. I know it sounds crazy, but 6 months. In some cases like less than 30 days, we can get a sale across for 5-figure amounts. You know what I mean? Like annual returning revenue. We know that governments are sticky customers. You know, their churn has been really, really good for us as a company. There are ways that we've learned from a business standpoint how to, like, you know, work partner success or customer success in a way that just keeps these customers happy. There are ways that we've learned how to iterate products in that public safety space, how to sell, you know, into that space, like what the value proposition, how to determine ROI that can make everything faster and smoother and easier to do. I think how to pitch it from a fundraising perspective and build into that market is something that I learned the hard way. I wasn't great at fundraising. I had to like learn some of these lessons and show like intellectual honesty where, that I just didn't have previously. So now I think that's going to make it easier to do this again.
Rahul, it's been a pleasure. Thank you.
Got it, man.
Thank you so much for joining the podcast. And that's a wrap.
That's a wrap.
Thanks for joining another episode of the Rollercoaster podcast. Really happy to have Rahul Sidhu on the podcast today. And 3 key things that I wanted to call out from the podcast that we learned today from Rahul were, number 1, if you're trying to raise money, fake it until you make it, until you get that first check. I think it's paramount. Number 2, maintaining good balance in your life will give you a competitive advantage as a founder. And number 3, if you're going to ask somebody to do something really hard in your company, you got to be willing to do it as well. You got to go through the hell, give the blood, the sweat, and the tears alongside with them. Thanks for joining. Like and subscribe, and we'll see you on the next one.